Hello, this is Aaron Maller from Parallax, and this is just a quick video to follow up on what we talked about in the BIM After Dark broadcast with Jeff the Revit Kid about a week ago. So we've had a lot of questions come in about the process of making groups and then being able to save them out of your project with all the dimensions and the tags, which we did a quick demo of. It wasn't the main portion of what we were discussing on the show, but I figured we would run through it in a quick video since people seem to have some questions about it. So first I'm going to just do one in a blank file. And then we'll jump into a model that actually has a lot of groups already created for something specifically like multifamily apartments. And we'll take a look at how to do it when you want to harvest those things out of a project like that, since the process is slightly different. To start, we're going to just create a model group, and then we'll take a look at it in the project browser. So I'm working in a floor plan sheet. It's not necessary that you be in a sheet, of course. You could be just working in your normal plan, and I'm going to place some walls. For the sake of this quick demo, I'm going to put the bounding walls inside the group as well, but of course, as you heard from the broadcast, normally I wouldn't include any bounding walls in the group because they would be in the main model, if you will, as either exterior walls or demise walls. We'll put a few additional walls in here so that we have a few more things to talk about, and we'll make something kind of like this. I'll put in a couple of doors, and we can put a few rooms in as well. Now what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to window select all of these items, but I am intentionally for this demo going to filter down to just the modeled objects. And we know now if we create a group, of course, it's going to prompt us just to create a model group. And we can call this sample model group 1. Now, of course, we know that there is the model group, and if we drag a copy of it over, it's just a normal model group, and you don't see anything called attached detail groups in the group. Now I'm going to undo back to before we created that group. So everything is still just free floating, and that model group does not exist in the project browser. Now, if I were to window select all of these things again and keep the tags selected here, and we were to create group, you'll notice now that you get two different prompts. One is the model group that we're creating, and one is the attached detail group. So the model group is the same. We'll call this sample model group 02. Now the attached detail group is the name of the particular view that you would like these annotations to be placed in. As an example, I could call this floor plan 8th, and we can now hit OK. You'll see that we get a model group just like the one we had before, and if we drag a copy, there is nothing different here except there is now an attached detail groups button. And you'll also notice down in the project browser that if you were to expand sample model group, there is now another detail group shown below the model group in the tree. Those are what we showed in the BIM After Dark broadcast, where you can bring things in from your library and have annotations saved in them. As an example, if I were to also place a few dimensions across this group now, going from the interior face to both sides of the wall and over to the interior face, and I was to place one going in the other direction, you now have a choice between either adding this to the detail group that already exists or creating another detail group inside the model group. In this particular example, I'll pull my dimensions because that's going to bother me later. And now if I go into my model group by hitting Edit Group, I can use the paperclip, which will then say create another detail group. And here I'm going to call it Floor Plan Dimensions. Now it's asking me to select between detail items, dimensions, and annotations that are not currently in a group already. It's important to note here that if the dimensions are touching items outside of the group, this isn't going to fly, and that's why the process will be a little different when we go to harvest one out of a project that's already done a little later. Now that we've done that, if we hit Finish, you'll see that if we were to then finish the model group as well, there were two group finishes there. One was the nested detail group, one was the model group as well. Now if you go down to sample model group, you'll see here that there are now two detail groups below it. This means that now if we were to save this thing out by going to the project browser and hitting Save Group, you will get an option for would you like to also save the attached detail groups as views. So if we save this to our desktop and we call it Awesome01, we can then go into a new project and look at bringing in this group. To show this off, we'll just go File New, and this time we won't even use a template. We'll just start off a blank file. Now, if we go to the Insert ribbon and use Load as Group to bring in the Awesome group that we placed on the desktop, there was an option to include detail groups in that dialog box, which I happen to have checked, which is the reason we'll see the detail groups in a minute. Now, I'm going to go to Place Model Group, and we'll drop our apartment here. You'll notice that once we place it in this blank file, that the Attach Detail Groups button is still here, and now we can choose between placing the 8th detail group or placing the Dimensions detail group. I'm just showing both as a demo, by the way. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can actually do both. So it's also important to note, I'm going to close that sample file and go back to the project where we created our group, that these things don't all have to be, of course, in floor plan or in reflected ceiling plan. If we were, of course, to place an interior elevation in one of the rooms, and we were to go to that elevation, which will have almost nothing in it because I haven't actually modeled anything in here, you can even put detail lines and dimensions for things in this view. So one thing we've had to do in model groups before is show some center lines for some light fixtures, and they may be center lines that didn't exist in the light fixture components or whatnot. So if I were to just put dimensions across from this wall, and again, this is not a real project, so I'm just putting random things in this group. There's a piece of text, and you could also, if you wanted to, place a tag. So just to show you, we'll go tag by category and click on the wall. It's a ridiculous place for a wall tag. Now, if we select the model group again and go into Edit Group, we can do the same Attach Detail group in this elevation or section view, and we can call it Living Room East Elevation. Really, I should say Elevation East for increasing order of specificity, like so. And now we can select, so here you'll see I accidentally clicked on the dimension, but the lines are not part of the group yet, so it's not going to let that happen. So if I click the lines first and then click the dimension, it'll be fine. So again, now we're in the Attach Detail group, which we finish, and then we'll hit Finish on the model group. And we can again go check in our project browser and see that the elevation is now there as well. If we save the group out again, we'll go back to our desktop, save it as Awesome01, include the attached detail groups. And then, of course, if we were to go and do the whole exercise again, where we create a blank project from no template, and load the group in, you could now also cut an elevation view and drop in that new detail group. So we'll go Insert Ribbon, Load as Group, Desktop, Awesome1, Include Attached Detail Groups was still checked. We'll place the model group. You'll notice here, by the way, that when you go to place the attached detail groups, only the floor plan ones are showing up because, of course, we're in a floor plan. So in this case, I'm just going to cut a section, and we'll go look at the section view. But because it is a vertical view, you'll see that now you can go to attach detail groups, and our elevation east living room is here, and there you go. Now this looks ridiculous, by the way, because we're at the wrong scale. The other elevation that we created was at 1/4 inch, so of course until you move it to 1/4 inch, that won't make a whole lot of sense. Now, if we go to a real project where groups have been used for modeling something like a multifamily project, Harvesting is something that'll typically happen after the project is done by whether it's the project staff or the BIM manager or whatnot. So in this particular example, we're looking at a unit here that's called type A3. In our template, as you saw in the broadcast, we have what's called the unit cloud. And so type A3 already has its own sheet that has all the annotations on it. Now, it's important to note that I don't recommend trying to have project teams do everything perfectly with harvesting in mind when they're building the groups. And what I mean by that is if we jump into this floor plan right here and we look at some of these dimensions that we may want to harvest, of course, some of them are touching things like the exterior wall, which is not part of the group. We know that that means if I go to create an attached detail group and I try to attach these dimensions, it's not going to let that happen. But there are generally elements there in the group, such as finished floors or ceilings, or you could put in additional elements when you're doing the harvesting process that would allow you to then add in those detail items to the group. We'll do a quick sample here. To start, we'll select this group and we will go into Edit Group and then say that we would like to add or attach a detail group. The group that I'm going to call this is the unit plan 1/4 inch plan. Now I'm going to start to add in our room tags, which of course it's going to let me do. I'll also start adding in our door tags, which it's going to let me do. And then some of the dimensions may let me and others may not. I'm guessing actually that most of the dimensions I'm looking at here are not going to allow us to. Right, because they're touching exterior elements. So here's what we'll do now. We'll temporarily finish to get out of the detail group and finish to get out of the model group. Then I'm going to jump into the view template because I know that this particular model has finished floors that exist in the unit that are just turned off because this isn't a finished plan. What's nice about finished floors in these model groups is you stand a pretty good chance that the finished floor is also going to be going to the same boundary as the perimeter walls, which we know we can't dimension to. So if we select the unit itself and the dimensions that are in the view, and then we isolate those objects in the view, we'll see which dimensions we need to fix. Here you'll see that a bunch of the dimensions have now dropped off. While I'm not going to go through and do them all, what we could do at this point is we could start dimensioning basically to the walls or to the ends of the finished floors where we want to show these values. So here we can replace the dimension that was on this side, and then similarly if we want to dimension across this unit. It's important to note, obviously, you do need to make sure your finished floors are modeled in the correct spot, but I'm going to assume that has to be done anyway. So assume we had done that for all of the dimensions. This is the part of harvesting that's a little different from creating a brand new group, is when you harvest, you will have to replace some dimensions that are touching items outside the group. But now, if we were to take this group and select actually the detail group that's within it, and to do that, we'll have to actually reset because we hid them. So if you tab down, you will be able to grab the detail group itself and you can edit that directly. You don't have to go directly through from the model group. And then you can add, and we can add in the new items that we put in, such as this dimension string here and this dimension string here. Now, obviously, I'm not going to do all the rest of the dimensions, but that'll basically accomplish the same goal. And now, if we were to go look at Unit A3 down in the browser, you would see that there are now the floor plan detail group that we made, as well as some nested model groups that are in that group as well. You could then do the exact same thing where you could save this group out, and then it could be reloaded into other projects, and the detail groups would be there for your use. Again, big thanks to Michael Graves Architecture, who is one of our clients at Parallax, and they let us use this model for these demonstrations, which has been a big help. Before we had time to put the finishing touches on this video, there was a conversation about groups that was happening on the Revit subreddit, and a couple of comments were made about element IDs and instances of elements actually being fully replaced when a model group was reloaded, and we wanted to point out that that's not the fact because it is another common misconception about groups. So what we're looking at here is this is the file where we created the group called Awesome, and of course it was named Sample Model Group 02. You will recall that then we did save the group out, and we put it on the desktop called Awesome01 and attached the detail groups. Once the group is saved, we're again then going to start a blank file with no template, and we'll load in that group. We'll place an instance of that group, and we'll place the detail groups as well. Now what we're also going to do is we're going to go back to our sample project, and we're going to save out a particular schedule that we created for this demo. We'll then go back into our new project, and we'll pull that same schedule in. What we've created in this schedule is that there are two columns, one for a project parameter called element ID and one for a project parameter called GUID. Now we've mocked up a very basic dynamo graph that's going to just say collect all the elements and then write their element ID and their GUID into those two parameters. If we were to run this graph in the new project that we've just created, you'll see that because we set those parameters to vary by group instance, that now we have the element IDs and the GUIDs, and in this case I've only done a schedule of the walls, so we can use them as an example. We will take a quick screenshot of this schedule since we're going to rerun the dynamo graph in a second to do a comparison. Then what we're going to do is now look at the files that we have open, and we're going to go open the file called Awesome1, which is the actual group instance file that we've been using to reload. In the situation of a multifamily project, once the groups are saved out, people will typically go into the group files to do the edits themselves. So here you'll see I'm in the actual group file, and now I can do things like move the doors around, adjust the walls. And it is true, of course, that I'm making non-destructive edits. It's also true that, of course, if you add a new item, there will be a new element ID, and if you were to delete an item or mirror an item without copy, that would also be a new ID, but that's also true in basic Revit editing, so there's no major difference there. So we can throw in a couple of additional walls, and then we can save the file again that's called Awesome01. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our project 8, which is our new file that we created, and we'll go back to its floor plan, just so that we're looking at the groups. And now what we'll do is we will again go to load as group, and we'll pick Awesome1 to be reloaded. We'll notice here that it has a date modified of a minute ago, and we'll tell it again to include the attached detail groups. Now here you will notice that it's going to say that you're reloading a group that's already loaded. Do you want to replace it? So if you say yes here, this is where again it's going to update the group called Awesome01 instead of actually replacing it. Would we do this on an actual project? Typically what I'll do during a reload is I will choose no and let it create an entirely new group type, and then I will go manually swap them, but that's a personal preference. You can choose yes, of course, and you'll see that now the groups have updated and the new walls are here. Now keep in mind that if we go to our wall schedule, here you're seeing the 4 new walls, but we don't actually have any guarantee that these are correct because they're not live updating fields. So what we will do is we'll bring our dynamo graph back and we'll run it again. We'll see that now it's updated, and again, we'll take a screenshot. And now we'll put our two screenshots side by side so that we can do a quick comparison. You'll see here, if we're looking at them, that the element IDs for the majority of the items as well as their GUIDs have not changed. 29754 is still 0743A, and so on for all of the walls that are not new. So it's simply not true that when a group is forcibly reloaded over a project that already has placed instances, that all of the elements in the model are actually replaced on the fly. If you have any more questions, catch us on social media and we can point you in the right direction.